But what I started to realize is that my ability to create success for myself was, and because I really was trying to create success for my family, and at the same time coaching, and I realized that my ability to create success had a lot to do with my ability to take action, and a lot of my ability to take action was based on my emotions around taking that action. And so I started to realize there was action I wanted to take and I didn't take. And when Tony Robbins would use state management tools where you make your move and you shift into a state, and for those few moments you feel great, but I found that I kept going back to the other state because results-based coaching, which is the Tony Robbins style, which was how coaching started, is basically focusing on the action and the result. And when the action when there's resistance to the movement, that coaching style forces action using leverage. What kind of dad are you going to be if you don't do it, right? So it forces misaligned action. And what I found for myself and most of my clients is we got average results. Certain personality types like high Ds, the As, they love that. They soak it up. But a lot of styles, especially women, sometimes Tony is too masculine for a lot of women. And what I started to discover is that when you get in alignment with the target, the strategy becomes automatic and it starts to flow. So it's actually progressed over the past like 10 years. And now I do what I call is alignment coaching. And so instead of focusing on like the individual action that you take to get what you want, it actually coaches on the mental operating environment, because the strategies that our brain will think of come from the level of thinking we're operating from. So instead of kind of going down up, I figured out how to coach at the frequency level of the frame level, which then creates an aligned mindset and an aligned action.
So, so you're saying Tony Robbins is a lot more results driven, maybe a lot more masculine energy. I know that there's that big contrast between pain and pleasure, but you're going to get the best results when you inflict pain. You know, there's a greater leverage on the pain side than there is on the pleasure side, meaning like, if you do this, you'll get X reward or result. Or if you don't do this, this is how messed up your life's going to be, right?
Yeah.
And so can you give some more nuance to kind of taking it to a next step, another level? And by the way, just for the record, I think there's good coaching out there, and I think there's bad coaching. I think there are good coaches and bad coaches. But I think more than anything, there is... it's not like it's not always as clear cut as good coach, bad coach. I think often it's what is the best coaching style for you right now in this moment or season of life. Yeah. And so I would love to kind of hear how you elevate to a more results oriented coaching style that isn't results driven. Yeah,
that's a great question. And that's a great clarity on coaching, right? Like I have 4 different coaches, right? So there's the coach for you at the different time. And sometimes coaches play different roles. And even a coach that you can say is a bad coach for you may actually have given you a gift you needed along the way, right? Because our journeys always go like this. So what I've discovered, it kind of goes back in 2019 when I was like working hard and grinding and nothing was working. And what actually happened is I hit the wall. I like literally didn't have a contract for 6 months. I'm like middle of 2019, finances were stretched. I'm like, this isn't working. I've pushed as a coach for 7 years. The dream is over. I got to go get a job. I literally quit. I go tell my wife, I cry. She was relieved that I was going to get a job. And then literally referrals start flowing in. And I'm like, what just happened? I haven't got a referral in months, and I quit. And then 4 contracts come in the next month. And that's when I started to understand that success doesn't come from hard work. Success comes from alignment with success. And hard work creates increases your chances of getting into alignment with success, right? It's almost like when we get in the car, we don't just start driving for 10 minutes and then put in the navigation. We put in the navigation first. So most people, when they're starting their goal, they're not in alignment with the target. And so if we actually look at how success happens, let's look how we hit targets. There's times when we hit targets where you're on fire. And I know, Justin, you've had times when you couldn't do no wrong and it was magical and flow and like, boom, what popped up? And there's times where you're maybe a year or two and nothing worked, right? We've had those, right?
Oh, yeah.
What's the difference, right? The difference is a flow And this side here doesn't need accountability. It doesn't need purpose. It's naturally inspired action. This side over here out of alignment needs accountability, focus, because it's grinding, right? So I like to operate this way. I don't like to operate this way. So what I've realized is that when you align people with the target, they will hit it faster, because the action you take comes from your mind, right? Now, if your mind is in alignment with the target, it'll generate an action that works. If your mind is not in alignment, it'll generate an action that doesn't work. So the amount of flow or resistance you feel when you're focusing on the target is an indicator of alignment. Are you confident or doubtful? Positive emotion, negative emotion. And when results-based coaching just immediately goes to the action piece. So what I've discovered is that the way we hit the target is we get the mindset into alignment with the target, because when the mindset is in alignment with the target, it generates a strategy, boom, that's automatic. It's like the byproduct, right? So how do you shift the mindset? Well, the mindset comes from the frequency of you. Right? Like the thought patterns. If you're in a happy frequency, you'll have happy mindset, happy thoughts, happy action. If you're a sad frequency, you'll be in a sad mindset, sad thoughts, sad actions. So what I've discovered is living in a little bit from 7th grade science, right? We live in an attraction-based universe. Atoms are mostly energy, so whatever we are in alignment with, we will hit. But what happens most times is we're not in alignment at the frame level because we have some form of doubt. I want to hit that big target, but I have doubt that it can occur because I haven't done it before, or I'm scared. So we end up operating with this frame level that's about 90% in alignment and 10% out of alignment. And then we're trying to figure out how to hit the target by finding strategies, by looking at mentors. But mentor strategies don't always work because they may not be in alignment with you. So instead of going from the top down, we shift from a frame and a mindset and action that's out of alignment into a frame that's in alignment, which immediately generates an aligned mindset and aligned action. So people say, Jason, I want to hire you as a coach. Are you going to do accountability? I'm like, no, I don't do accountability. They're like, what? You're not in accountability? No, you only need accountability when you're out of alignment. And in fact, I'd say probably 95% of my coaching calls, I don't have a client getting a clear action at the end of the call.
Interesting. Yeah, that's different.
Because when you're in alignment, you know exactly what to do. So I have figured out the subtle game of aligning people with what they want, and then the mindset is automatic. So it's all a byproduct of alignment instead of forcing the action up.